Hello everyone and welcome to chapter 35 of this Flutter course. In the previous chapter, as you saw, we started talking about how we can update an existing node in the node list, and we refactored our new node view, as it was called before, to become, I believe, create update node view. And this node view is now able to do two things: either create a new node or update an existing one. So we didn't create a whole new view just to be able to update an existing node. So that went really fine. However, as I mentioned at the end of the previous chapter, we have a little bit of a problem with our node service in that right now, node service doesn't really take into consideration which users logged into the application, and hence it cannot return relevant nodes for that particular user. So what the node service at the moment is doing is just fetching all the nodes from the database and returning it to the current user. This is going to cause an issue in that when we log in with one user, we're going to see all the nodes in the system, and when we log out with a user and log in with a completely new user, we're again going to see all the nodes that are stored in the node service. So we have to fix that in this chapter. Before we get started with that, we have a little bit of a problem with our updating. And this is a bug that's been inside the application for a while, since we basically created our CROT service, and we have to fix that. So let's have a look at what this bug actually is before before we go on. So I'm going to put strcpy in here, and I'm going to put Visual Studio Code in here as well. All right, so I hope you can see the screen. So here right now we have, maybe I don't have to hope for it. I could just bring the screen to be a little bit bigger. So if you look in strcpy right now, we have my node number 2, and that is exactly the bug. So let's go in here and to the first one, and I'm just going to say my node number 1. Oops. And go out, and everything looks fine right now. It's just because we are updating our local cache as well. So things are looking good. However, if you do a hot restart of the application, and my strcpy just died, so that's okay. I can live with that as a free software. So strcpy, and I can see now I've lost actually my debug command of strcpy as well. So I'm going to restart the application. But what is going to happen now is, as you'll soon see, is we have a little bit of a problem with our update node functionality. So you can see now that I restarted the application, all of a sudden both nodes were changed to my nodes number 1, and that's not correct. That's because there is a bug inside the application. So how it's manifesting itself is that when you update a node, locally it looks fine, but if you do a hot restart, excuse me, then it's going to be tripping like it is tripping right now. And the bug is right here. I don't know if you can notice that. Excuse me. I don't know if you can notice that, but we have this call to the update function. However, we are not actually telling, and this is also, by the way, this is inside NotesService.dart, inside the update node function. In here, you can see we're issuing a query to SQLite, and we're saying update the nodes table and set the text to this text. All right, and that's exactly what SQLite is doing. It's going through all the rows inside the node table and updating their text column with the given text. So what we missed in there is a where argument. So we're not telling SQLite right now which row to update. So it's updating all the rows, okay? So we need to fix that as a matter of urgency. So let's go in here and say we have now, let's see, this is our update. And right after the creation of this dictionary, we're going to say a where, and we're going to say the ID field of that column that we want to update, or sorry, the ID field of that row or node that we want to update is going to be equal to something. And the where args are going to be equal to our node's ID. So I need you to also write this code the way I've written it here. So now if you say my node number 1 and I go in here and I say my node number 2, then it's going to do the right thing. So if you do a hot restart, then you can see that the nodes are actually populated correctly. Okay. I'm not going to do a hot restart just because I know strcpy may crash again and I have to restart the whole process. So I don't want to waste your time with that. And that's why I'm not going to do a hot restart, but this should work. Okay. Sorry again. Okay. Now back to what we were working on, or back to what the main goal of this chapter is. So let's have a look at how we can fix the problem with our with our notes service. If you go here, not being able to return relevant notes, except it's returning all the notes. So I believe it's inside note service right here. Oh, we were there already. Sorry about that. So we have our note service, and you can see at the moment when we say here notes, this is happening inside cache notes, which is, you can see it's reading all the notes from the database using get all notes, putting it inside, putting it, sorry, you couldn't see that. Cache notes is reading all the notes and then putting them inside the local variable, and also populating the stream controller with that. Okay. But what we need to do is that we need to make sure that the current user is saved somewhere inside this node service, so that a node service knows that, okay, here's the current user. Whenever I return all my notes to the call site using this all notes functionality in here, I need to actually filter out the notes inside that list to make sure only relevant notes that were created by that current user are returned from this stream. Okay. So what we need then is to kind of keep hold of some sort of a current user in our service inside this note service. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's go actually define our database user in here, and we say this is optional and it's equal to user. However, we always want to make sure that that user is set before you actually grab a list of notes. Okay, so this is the expectation of this note server. So the note server says that if you want to be able to read all notes the way you're doing it, as clean as you're doing it, you also make sure that you've set this current user. Okay, so if that expectation is not met, we're going to throw an exception, and we're going to call that exception user should be set before reading all notes. As the caption indicates, we're going to go to our CROT exceptions, which we had from before. So let's find that CROT exceptions in the given folder. In the given paths that I've mentioned in the bottom of the screen, lib services CROT exceptions. And we're going to define a new exception called user should be set before reading all notes, like this. All right. So please go ahead and define that as one of the exceptions in your application as well under CROT exceptions. All right. So what we need now is a way for us to be able to filter all the given notes based on the current user. So let's have a look at our all notes at the moment here. You see, what we need is to ensure that this all notes can actually filter the given notes inside this stream using some sort of a filter functionality. So what we have, you can see a stream here. Let's say stream. A stream has a function called where. So what it does is that, as you can see, it has it allows you to grab the current content of that stream, and then you can pass a test on that. So you can say, if this object is equal to this, then do that and return this value. Otherwise, return something else. So it's kind of like a filtering mechanism on a stream, on a stream's value. However, our stream includes a list. Remember, let's go back here. In excuse me, in here you can see we return a stream of a list of database nodes. So what we want is a where clause that's 2 layers deep. We want to be able to filter out and change the contents of this stream based on the current user, and we need to then filter the list based on the current user's ID and only return the database nodes that are relevant for that user. So this is a bit of a special case. So for that, we need to create our own function, which is a manual like filter function on our stream. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. So what we need to do in here is to create a new file. As you can see under lib extensions list filter. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Let's see if we already have some extensions. So I can see under lib right now we have constants, enum, services, utilities, views, but we don't have any extensions. So the best way then to do that, to create that filter.dart file, is just right click on lib and say new file. And then I'm going to say extensions, list, filter.dart. Okay. So then what we're going to do in here is to create an extension on our stream. So let's go ahead and just say extension filter on stream of t. So the reason I'm doing it like this is that so we can grab hold of the contents of that stream inside our extension. Okay. So like if you did something like this, that would still work. But in here, what we're saying is that we're extending any stream that has a value of t. And in our filter function, then we can access that t, as you'll soon see. Okay. So then we're going to say stream of a list of that object. And we're going to call our function filter. And in our filter function, we want to grab another function that does a testing of the items. So let's then say bool function that grabs an item of that type. So you can see now we're basically broken down the requirements of our filtering that was supposed to be 2 levels deep is now 1 level deep because our filter function passes t, which is our database node, to this where function. Okay. So this doesn't exist at the moment, but we're creating that. Okay. So in here, what we're going to say then is what we are going to do is we need to map our stream, and that will, you can see it gives us the values. So in here we get the items, and in here then we say items where we pass that where clause in here, and we say to list like this. So and I can see in here, actually, we have a filter of t, but our stream needs to have a list of t. So then that's going to fix the problem for us. So in this case, we're actually drilling down 2 levels deep inside the list. Okay. So this is the function that we just created. So it allows us to filter a stream of list of something. And then our where clause is going to get that something. And should that something pass the test, then it will be included in the final list. So look, I know this is complicated stuff, but please pause the video, think a little bit about it. We have a stream containing a list of things. Now we want a stream of the list of the same thing, as long as those things, any individual thing, passes a specific test, which is specified using this where clause. Okay. This is difficult. I know it may be like so difficult for some users that you'll be like, oh, I don't get any of this. I don't understand. But you will just need to practice. You need to just grab a hold of this code, go ahead and implement this on some other functionalities, like a list of things, and see, okay, if I have a list of things, how do I filter out that thing inside? And it will finally click. Okay. I know it's a bit complicated. So we've done that now. What we need now is to set the current user in the node service. As you can see right now, we have get or create user functionality in our node service. So let's go back to our node service and find that function, get or create user. And at the moment, it just takes an email. As the caption indicates, we need a parameter inside this function that also says set as current user. So when you get or create a user, which we're at the moment doing, I believe, in our notes view. So let's go in here. Notes view. In here, you see get or create a user. So this is like the bare bone. This is the actual very important part of our application, where a user either is retrieved from the database the way he or she was, or it's created. And it just makes sense to make that user the current user at this point. Okay, so let's go in our node service and let's change that functionality. So I'm going to bring up my notes as well. And let's add a parameter called set as current user right here. Gonna put a comma there. And let's just say that this parameter is a Boolean set as current user. And we're gonna set it to true by default. All right. So I need you to do the same thing, please. So after doing that, when we retrieve the user, we're going to look at this parameter. We're going to say if set as current user set as current user, then we're going to set our own user to this user that we just retrieved from the database. And also, don't forget, when you create this user, you also have to set the current user if that Boolean flag is true. So let's just say set as current user here as well. Then we're going to set user is created user. Okay. So what we did here is we just said if we could retrieve that user from the database and this Boolean parameter is true, then we set our own user to this user. Otherwise, if we had to create that user and this parameter is true, then we do the same thing. We set this current user to the created user. And if you're getting some errors in here saying that this underscore user cannot be found, it's probably because you missed adding this database user to your node service, which is something I mentioned just before we moved on to creating that filter function, okay? Or sorry, before we created this exception. All right, that part is now done as well. Now what we need to do is to do the actual filtering. And that is something that we need to do is, you can see as a caption indicates, change all nodes stream to filter for the current user. And that's something we need to do in the all nodes function, or sorry, the getter. So right here, what we're gonna say is I think I'm going to change them. Just let's leave it like this. So I'm just gonna say node stream controller dot stream, and right here we can use our filter function. You see now Visual Studio Code is like confused, like, oh, there is no filter function on a stream. But remember, we actually added that ourselves. So I'm going to get help from Visual Studio Code and say command dot on Mac or control dot on Linux and Windows in Visual Studio Code, and then it's going to understand, oh, there is a filter function that you've defined on a stream. Do you want me to import that? And I'm going to say yes, please. So now we have the filter. Remember, filter then gets a note, right? And if I move my mouse over it, now you can see that says, oh, you have a database note. However, our stream actually contains a list of database nodes. And all of a sudden, our filter gets one note at a time. So this is the beauty of creating your own extensions so that you can drill down inside existing objects and grab what you need inside your application, all right? So in here, what we need is to create a function. Then remember, this function has to return a Boolean. We haven't returned anything from here yet. That's why we're getting an error. So at the end of this function, we need to return a Boolean. So let's just say final current user is this user. And if this current user is not null, which is like the condition that we actually expect, then we're going to do some code. Otherwise, we need to throw our exception. User should be said before. Okay, so this is our expectation from the caller. If you're reading all notes from this interface, you need to make sure that the current user was set when you call this function. So this needs to be true. Okay, you may not have seen the code, but you could also argue that, oh, wait a minute, if this is like the expectation of this interface that the current user should always be set before you read all notes, then why don't you make that the default? Why don't you just do that and remove this function and always set the user as the default? Well, the reason behind that is the current user has to be set only when you're working with all nodes. Now, this node service should be able to work like to update existing nodes or remove existing nodes. In those functionalities should still work if the current user is not set, right? Because those functionalities are pure CRUD functions that say update a node with this ID, get a user with this ID, delete a node with this ID, etc., etc. They are not dependent on a current user. However, all nodes is dependent on the current user, and it just makes sense to have this functionality in here that says set as current user that is defaulted to true. So if you're using all nodes, then it throws an exception if the current user is not set. Okay, so that's my reasoning for having this as a parameter and not making it the default behavior of this class. All right, so if current user was not null, that's like the happy path. So then we say we return this node as long as its user ID is the same as the current user ID. So we say note a user ID should be equal to current user dot ID. Okay, and remember, we're not returning a note. we're returning a boolean. Remember our filter function? It has a where statement that has to return a boolean. So we're not returning any notes. In here, we're just checking, is this notes user ID the same as that? Then do this, okay? So that should now be good to go. So what we could do, I know this may actually break things now because I have some problems with strcpy, but you have to excuse me for that. It's nothing that I have control over. But since we've changed quite a lot of code, I'm gonna now close all these screens, these tabs, and I'm gonna do a hot reload. But this most probably is gonna crash the strcpy. Oh, it didn't. Great. Thank God for that. So we have our notes. Now, how do we put this into test? What we need to do is to log out and log in. So I'm going to go to console, Firebase, and let's go to our application, which is my notes Flutter project. We have two authenticated users, these two emails at the moment. So right now I'm logged in with one of them. I don't really know which one. So I'm going to log out here. So I'm then going to log in with pixelityab@gmail.com foodbarbaz. Log in. And I can see those notes were under pixelityab. So then I'm going to log out again, and I'm going to log in with the other user like this, foodbarbaz, and I'm going to then press the login button. And I haven't yet verified my email, so I will have to do that. So let me just see if I can take care of that right now. I'm going to then bring my email and go to and see if I can find this verification email, and I can't. So I'm just going to send email verification, and it's going to send a new email verification to me. All right. I got the email verification and it looks like this. So I'm just going to click on that, and I can see now it says your email has been verified. Okay. So let me go to restart then. And now that I've verified my email, I'm going to try to log in with a user as, oops, this is register. I want to go to login. So here, foodbarbaz, and then login. And now I can see for my user, I'm not seeing any notes. But just to make sure, I'm just going to create a new user and say this note, create a new note. I'm going to say this note was created for bound dot, or just put my email in here like this. Okay. I'm going to go back and I can see that the note is displayed here. Then what I'm going to do is just to log out of this user and log in with the other user, just to make sure that that node that was created by the other user is not displayed to this user, okay? And now we can log in and I can only see nodes that were for this user. So congratulations, that was a lot of work that we did, and the application seems to be working the way we've designed it. So that's a great job. What we need to do now is just ensure that we won't lose our code, as is a tradition. So we need to commit our code and also tag our code, okay? So I'm going to do some shuffling around here on the screens, and I'm going to increase the size of Visual Studio Code so you see it better. Let's do git status and see what the status is. We've modified two files and we've also added a whole new folder. So I'm just going to say git add all. And if you look at our logs, the previous step was step 17. Now we have to commit our work and tag it as step 18. And if you look at your tags as well, you should have step 17 here. So let's say git commit, and I'm going to say step 18 in here. And I'm going to push these changes to remotes, which in my case is GitHub. You may be using Bitbucket or some other remote. And let's then tag as step 18 as well here and push your tags. All right, so that part is done. Now we have tagged and committed our code. So if you say git status, you should have nothing pending here to be committed. All right. Wow, fantastic. So again, as tradition is, we always talk about what we need to mention in the next chapter, or what we're going to go through in the next chapter at the end of every chapter. So up until this point, we've been using our Notes CRUD service, and that's been working really good. Everything's been saved on the device. However, if you really think about it, you've now learned how to work with CRUD, and that was like one of my intentions at the beginning of this course. I wanted to teach you about CRUD because it's one of the absolute most important things that any backend developer or front-end developer such as Flutter developer has to know about. So I hope that you've learned that now. However, we have a big problem here, and that is all our notes are saved locally in a SQLite database. And should anything go wrong, for instance, if the users something happens to the user's telephone, all that data is going to disappear. So the user's notes may disappear, and you may think, well, what's so wrong about that? Well, if you're like me, I use my notes like the default notes application in Macintosh and also on Linux quite a lot. So I store very, very important information sometimes in my notes. You'd be surprised that the outline for this course, I actually managed it all. Managed all of that inside the notes application on my Macintosh. So I wrote the entire outline, took many, many hours, and I would have been devastated if those notes disappeared for some reason, or if my kids got a hold of my telephone and just removed the notes, and there was no reason, and then there was no way for me to grab those notes back again. So what we need to do now is just ensure that we can store these notes in some sort of a backend so that it's sitting in the cloud, so we don't have to manage them locally. And that's what we're going to use Firebase for. And we're going to start talking more and more about Firebase storage from the beginning of next chapter. So I hope you enjoyed this chapter. Grab your refreshments, coffee or tea or whatever you want, some chocolates, and I'll see you in the next chapter.